I should have walked away the second she told me her mom was coming. It was supposed to be a normal first date. Dinner, conversation, maybe a second date if things went well. But about an hour before we were supposed to meet, Emma dropped a bomb. "Hey, just a heads up, my mom's coming too. She really wants to meet you." I read the text twice, then a third time. Was this a joke? Was she testing my reaction? I stared at my phone, waiting for a follow-up message saying, "Just kidding." But nothing came. I should have canceled. I should have run. Instead, like an idiot, I replied, Sure. That's unexpected, but okay." And that was the beginning of the worst date of my life. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early, wanting to get my bearings before this awkward situation unfolded. I spotted Emma right away. She was sitting in a booth by the window, dressed nicely, smiling when she saw me. But right next to her was her mother. Emma waved me over, and I forced a polite smile as I walked up. The moment I got close, her mother's eyes locked onto mine, cold, unblinking, studying me, like a predator sizing up its next meal. Emma beamed. "Hey, you made it!" I smiled back, but my stomach was tight. I pulled out my chair, and before I could even sit, her mom spoke first. "So, you're the boy. Not hello, not nice to meet you, just that." Her tone was flat, emotionless. I couldn't tell if she was unimpressed or just weird. I hesitated, then sat down slowly. Yeah, that's me." She squinted at me like I had already failed some kind of invisible test. I glanced at Emma, looking for some kind of normalcy, but she just giggled. "Oh, don't mind her. She just likes to be protective." I nodded awkwardly. "That's nice?" Emma's mom didn't respond. She just kept staring at me. Before I could even pick up the menu, she launched into an interrogation. "So, what do you do for work?" I blinked. "I work in marketing." She nodded slowly, as if mentally taking notes. "Stable job?" Yeah. "How much do you make?" I nearly choked on my water. Emma just laughed. "Mom, stop." But her mom wasn't joking. She just stared at me, waiting for an answer. I stammered out something vague about it being enough. She wasn't satisfied. "Do you own property?" I nearly walked out right then. Emma finally cut in. "Mom, come on, it's just dinner." Her mom sighed dramatically. Fine. I just need to know what kind of man we're dealing with here." The waiter arrived, breaking the tension for a moment. We placed our orders, though honestly, I barely glanced at the menu. My brain was still reeling from the unexpected financial interrogation. I forced a smile, trying to reset the energy. "So, how was your day?" Emma started talking about work, something about an annoying client. And for a brief moment, I relaxed. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this would even out. Then, out of nowhere, her mom leaned in. "You know," she said, tilting her head, "you have strong hands." My entire body tensed. "Excuse me?" She smiled. "Your hands. They look strong." I glanced at Emma, waiting for her to acknowledge how weird this was. She just giggled again. "Mom!" Her mother didn't even flinch. She just studied my hands like they held some deep secret. "I'm just saying," she continued, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "Good genes are important." I stared at her. The air in the restaurant suddenly felt heavier. Good genes? What the hell did that mean? I forced a laugh, though it came out nervous. Thanks?" Her mom suddenly gasped softly, like something had just clicked in her mind. She turned to Emma, gripping her hand. "Oh, honey, he's perfect," Emma blushed. "You think so?" Her mom nodded. And I felt sick. Before I could even process what was happening, her mom let out a strangled gasp. I whipped my head toward her just as she clutched her chest. Her breathing became ragged, her face twisted in pain. Her fingers trembled against the table. And then, She collapsed. Her body went limp, face slamming against the table. Silverware clattered to the floor. The waiter froze mid-step. A guy at the next table screamed. The restaurant erupted in chaos. And Emma? She barely reacted. She just sighed and took another sip of wine. "Relax," she said. "She does this sometimes." I froze. Her mom was slumped over the table, unmoving. Her breathing was ragged, her hand still clutching her chest. The silverware had fallen onto the floor, and the restaurant was dead silent. A guy at the next table jumped to his feet. Someone else gasped, and a woman near the bar whispered, "Oh my God." My heart was pounding. Was this actually happening? Was this woman dying in front of me? I started to reach for my phone, but before I could dial 911, I glanced at Emma. She wasn't moving. She wasn't panicking. She just sighed and took another sip of wine. "Relax," she said, setting her glass down. "She does this sometimes." I blinked. My brain short-circuited. "What?" I whispered. Emma rolled her eyes, as if her mom collapsing was nothing more than a spilled drink. "She does this with all my dates." I looked back at her mom's limp body. She was still motionless, face down on the table. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "She does what?" I asked, my voice shaking. Emma finally turned to face me, a small, amused smile playing on her lips. "It's a loyalty test," she said. "She wants to see how you react in a crisis. You know, to make sure you're good for me." "A loyalty test?" I stared at her, trying to process the absolute insanity I had just heard. Her mom was pretending to have a heart attack in a public restaurant to test me? This had to be a joke. I turned to the guy at the next table, who was still staring at the scene in horror. The waiter stood frozen, unsure if he should call an ambulance. I turned back to Emma. "You're telling me," I said slowly, struggling to keep my voice steady, "that your mom is faking this?" Emma grinned and nodded. "Yeah?" I looked back at her motionless mother, then at Emma, then at her mom again. "You've got to be kidding me," I whispered. Emma leaned forward slightly, her eyes sparkling like this was funny to her. "Oh, come on," she said, nudging my hand playfully. "You should feel honored. It means she actually likes you." I felt my blood pressure spike. This wasn't normal. This wasn't cute. This was insane. I opened my mouth, ready to say something. Anything. When suddenly, her mom moved. The moment her fingers twitched, the entire restaurant gasped in shock. And then, like a horror movie, she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met mine, and she smirked. "Oh, honey," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve. "You passed." Silence. Absolute. Dead silence. The waiter was still frozen mid-step. A couple near us looked like they had just witnessed a paranormal event. The guy at the next table, who had been seconds away from calling 911, stared in disbelief. I just sat there, my body completely numb. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to scream or laugh hysterically. Emma giggled. "Told you," she said, like this was totally normal behavior. I couldn't speak. My hands were still shaking. My brain was trying to understand what the hell had just happened. "You mean," I finally managed to say, voice hoarse, "you were faking it?" Emma's mom casually picked up her fork as if nothing had happened. "Oh, sweetie, don't be so dramatic," she said with a wave of her hand. "It was just a little test." My jaw clenched. A test. This woman had just pretended to drop dead in the middle of a restaurant as a test. I stared at Emma, waiting for her to acknowledge how crazy this was. She didn't. She just gave me that same bright, easygoing smile. "So," she said, picking up a menu, "ready to order dessert?" I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. My brain was still trying to catch up with what had just happened. Emma's mom faked a heart attack. A full-blown, dramatic, Oscar-worthy collapse in a public restaurant to test me. And now she was just sitting there, eating like nothing happened. The restaurant was still tense. People were staring, whispering. The guy who had almost called 911 shook his head, grabbed his jacket, and walked out like he couldn't be near this level of crazy. I wiped my palms on my jeans. My hands were clammy. My heart was still racing. Finally, I managed to find my voice. "Are you out of your mind?" Emma's mom barely looked up. "Oh, come on, don't be so dramatic." I let out a breath, trying to steady myself. "Dramatic? Dramatic?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You literally collapsed onto the table, clutched your chest, and—" I gestured wildly. "Died for like 5 minutes." Emma laughed. Laughed. Like I had just told the funniest joke in the world. "You should have seen your face," she giggled, nudging my arm. "Priceless." I jerked away from her touch. "This isn't funny," I said, my voice tight. Emma sighed like I was being difficult. Okay. Look," she said, setting her napkin down. "I get that it's a little untraditional." I blinked. "Untraditional?" she continued, completely unfazed. "But dating is serious, you know. My mom wants to make sure I'm with someone who can handle stress. Someone loyal, who won't run at the first sign of trouble." I stared at her. "So, what? If I had walked out, I would have failed?" Emma shrugged. "Pretty much." I ran a hand down my face. This was insane. "What happens to the ones who fail?" I asked, mostly out of morbid curiosity. Emma's mom finally put down her fork, her lips curling into a smug smile. "Oh, you don't want to know." That did it. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Nope, I'm done." Emma's face fell. "Wait, seriously?" Her mom sighed dramatically. "Oh, honey, I was really hoping you'd pass." I scoffed. "Yeah? Well, I passed the never speaking to you again test." I turned, grabbed my jacket, and walked out. I didn't look back. I could still hear Emma calling my name, but I didn't stop. I needed fresh air. I needed to be far, far away from whatever the hell that was. And I needed a strong drink. This was officially the worst date of my life. I stepped outside and inhaled deeply, letting the cold night air fill my lungs. It felt grounding, real, unlike everything that had just happened inside that restaurant. Even now, my hands were trembling, my heart still hammering against my ribs. It wasn't just the shock of what I had witnessed, but the sheer insanity of how casual they had been about it. Emma and her mother had treated it as if it were nothing more than an amusing little test, something quirky they did to new people, like offering a handshake or asking about favorite movies. But this was beyond anything remotely normal. I started walking toward my car, my mind replaying the night's events over and over. The way Emma's mother had collapsed so convincingly. The way Emma had barely reacted, and worst of all, the way she had expected me to be okay with it. It was as if they believed they had done me a favor. I could still hear her mother's voice in my head. "Oh, honey, you passed." I shook my head, exhaling sharply. The only thing I had passed was the threshold of my patience. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I already knew who it was. I ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. By the time I reached my car, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled my phone out and glanced at the screen. 3 missed calls. Then a text. "Emma, where did you go? You left so fast." I scoffed. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just a casual text, as if I had simply walked out in the middle of a movie or forgotten to pay the bill. Another text popped up before I could even put my phone away. "Emma, are you mad?" Was I mad? No, I wasn't mad. I was unnerved. I was done. I unlocked my car and got in, gripping the steering wheel as I took a moment to breathe. This was officially the worst date of my life. Another text. "Emma, Look, I get that it was a lot, but my mom really liked you. She thinks you have great genes. She wants to talk to you. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting into a knot. She wanted to talk to me? I had just escaped, and she wanted to drag me back in. Before I could respond, there was a sudden knock on my window. I nearly jumped out of my seat, my pulse spiking. For a split second, pure panic flooded my chest, and for the briefest moment, I expected to see Emma's mom standing there, smiling like a horror movie villain, clipboard in hand, ready to draft up a contract for my DNA. But it wasn't her mother. It was Emma. She stood with her arms crossed, brows furrowed, her breath visible in the cold air. There was irritation in her expression, as if I was the one being unreasonable. I hesitated before rolling the window down just a crack. What? My voice was flat, drained of any patience. Emma let out an exasperated sigh. Are you seriously just leaving? Just like that? I stared at her incredulous. Emma, your mom faked a heart attack in the middle of a restaurant. That's not normal behavior. She shrugged like it was nothing. So, you passed. I let out a short, humorless laugh, rubbing my temple in frustration. That's not the point. Emma sighed dramatically, shaking her head like she was disappointed in me. You're overreacting. I turned to her, genuinely stunned. Overreacting? I repeated. Emma, what if I told you my dad fakes a stabbing on the first date just to see if a girl is brave enough to be with me? She blinked, clearly taken aback. That's different. No, it's not, I said firmly. It's the same level of insanity. Emma let out an irritated sigh, rolling her eyes. Look, my mom just wants the best for me, okay? If you can't handle her, then maybe you're not the right guy. I looked her in the eye and nodded. You're absolutely right. I'm not. Without waiting for her response, I rolled up the window, started the engine, and drove away, leaving every ounce of crazy behind me. As I drove away, my hands were still gripping the steering wheel too tightly. My pulse was still racing, and my mind was still trying to process everything that had just happened. The night had started with a simple dinner date. It ended with a woman faking a heart attack to test my loyalty, while her daughter saw absolutely nothing wrong with it. And somehow, I was the bad guy for leaving. I let out a sharp breath, trying to shake off the unease sitting in my chest. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it at first, but after the fourth time, I sighed and glanced at the screen. Emma. I exhaled, shaking my head as I saw the newest text. Emma. You're seriously leaving me over this? This question mark. She made it sound like I had walked out over something trivial, like a bad joke or a minor argument about dessert. I ran my tongue over my teeth, debating whether or not to respond. But before I could even think about it, another message popped up. Emma, you were doing so well. I thought you were different. That one got me. I thought back to her mother, the way she had smirked at me after coming back to life, the way Emma had treated the whole thing like it was cute. For them, this was a game, a test, one that I was never going to pass no matter how well I had reacted. I gritted my teeth and deleted the message. Then I blocked her number. I wasn't going to waste another second on Emma, her mother, or whatever cult-like initiation they had planned for me next. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and drove in silence, my mind still buzzing with disbelief. What if I had actually stayed? What if I had played along? Would there have been another test? Would her mother have collapsed again just to see if I reacted differently? Would the next test have been even worse? I shuddered at the thought. I had been on bad dates before. Girls who spent the whole night talking about their exes, people who were glued to their phones, even one date who had brought her dog and fed it off her plate. But this wasn't just bad. This was certifiable. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the car, and let out a long, tired breath. Worst date ever. I grabbed my phone, hesitating for a second before unlocking it and opening Reddit. I went straight to r/dating hell. Then, without a second thought, I started typing. I went on a date where my date's mom faked a heart attack just to see if I was loyal enough. What's your worst dating nightmare? Drop it in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone.